G'day team, and welcome to another vlog update on my lead into Taupo 70.3 in December. We're sort of 3 weeks in, and that means we've got about 14 weeks to go until actual race day. So this is a recovery week, and instead of running through essentially some of the workouts and the likes that I've actually been doing and the things I've been up to this week, because it's pretty easy and cruisy, I thought I'd use this time to actually run through a bit of this past training block in terms of a little bit of data and run you through a couple of the tests that I did this week to see whereabouts my fitness is at. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into it. As I mentioned in previous vlog updates, this last block has actually been a little bit atypical and not the usual for me. So if we go back a couple of weeks, that very first week was a very run specific, intense week, followed by a sort of recovery run week. And both of those weeks are pretty typical from a biking perspective. And then no swimming with lockdown here in New Zealand. And then we've just jumped into a recovery week. So normally I like to work with 3 weeks on, 1 week recovery, but this particular block to line up with my build period going into Taupo 70.3, I had to make it a 2 week on, 1 week off. Some of the information that I'm really keen to provide, I would normally start, swim, bike, run and go like a triathlon, but seeing as swim was a big cancel for those particular 2 weeks, let's actually start with the bike. So looking at volume wise, week 1, we sat at a total hours spent on the bike of 12 hours and 15 minutes. All of that was actually indoors on the turbo trainer, given we were under lockdown, and also it's magpie season and I hate getting swooped by them. So I was quite happy to sit inside and grind away in the pain cave behind me here. Week 2, we followed that up with another 12 hours and 4 minutes on the bike, so pretty much a repeat of the previous week. So good amount of bike volume, which I actually really enjoyed. In terms of intensity for those 2 weeks, when I'm talking in zones, basically zones 1 and 2 on the bike for me are easy to very easy. And then anything zone 3 and above is essentially like race pace or harder efforts that are really high end and trying to be quite hard to really stretch the body and allow it to really adapt and grow from there. So time spent and as a percentage of total hours in zone 3 or above was 5.2%, which gave me about 38 minutes of that 12 hours and 15 spent at a really hard effort. There was near on 60%, so 59.8% of time spent in zone 2. So that is 7 hours and 20 minutes, so that's just easy riding. And then another 35% spent at zone 1, which is very easy riding. So that's another 4 hours and 20 minutes. Moving on to week 2, that zone 3 and above, we spent 13.5% there. So that ended up being nearly an hour and 40 minutes worth of time spent at that very hard intensity. 39.6% and 46.9% respectively in zones 2 and 1, and that basically totaled up the rest. So 4 hours and 57 minutes and 5 hours and 39 minutes worth of zone 1 and 2 time spent on the bike. So with that intensity stuff for those 2 weeks, the two interval sessions that I used, week 1 was an 8 times 2 minutes interval with 1 minute recovery, and those 2 minute intervals were done at 345 watts. In week 2, we stepped that interval session up, and so instead of the 8 times 2, we did 8 times 3 minutes with 1.5 minutes recovery, and they were again at 345 watts, and I was able to achieve and hit both of those intervals as planned, so that was really promising. If we move on to the run, we're looking here, week 1, that really run specific intense block. We covered 89.6 kilometers, and then week 2, we were back down to 71.1 kilometers. Using the same pattern with the bike in terms of intensity is also the same with the run. So that's sort of zone 3 and above is those sort of hard or very, very hard efforts. But unlike the bike, I actually spent no time in those very, very hard efforts. My focus was on that sort of high zone 3 tempo pace. So just a really good, honest pace, but not absolutely blowing yourself to smithereens. So in week 1, 44.5% of my run time and run distance was spent at in that zone 3, so that's 39.8 kilometers. And that zone 3 pace, just to give you a bit of a reference point, is about 3 minutes 30 to 3 minutes 40 a k. So I spent a large chunk of time there. Zone 2 was 30.6%, so 27.5 kilometers spent in that sort of easy zone 2 running, just base miles. And then zone 1 being very, very easy running, 24.7% or 22 kilometers. So you can see that is very much skewed towards that zone 3, good, honest, hard tempo work as was planned. Week 2, we can see the zone 3 dropped right the way back to 10%, so only 7 Ks of that 71 kilometers. And then zone 2 and zone 1 respectively made up the rest of the time, so 24.3% or 17.2 kilometers in zone 2 and 65.6% or 46.5 kilometers in zone 1. So that was very much trying to recover from that week beforehand. The main intervals that were actually used, I won't go through all of them from that first week in week 1 because there was 5 of them. But the 2 primary ones that I tried to build on throughout the week was at the beginning of the week I did a 4 times 5 minute tempo interval, and those paces were ranging between 3:38 and 3:34 per kilometre. I then built through 4 by 5 minutes to 3 by 10 and then tried to finish with 3 by 15 at the end of the week. And if you've watched that particular week's vlog, you'll notice or you'll know that I failed completely at that and was only able to get the 2 times 15 minutes in rather than the 3. I just didn't have it on that day at the end of that particular week. And those 2 times 15 minute tempo efforts that I did were 3:35 per kilometre and 3:37 per kilometre averages. In week 2, the only tempo session that I did, so again, no high end stuff, it was just that good honest tempo session. I did a 3 by 10 minute tempo. And my splits there were 3:36 per kilometre, 3:32 and then 3:21, so descending down. So I was really, really happy with that. And that, including the rest times in between, the 3 minutes in between each of those actually gave me a 10k PB. So I wasn't racing, that was just a good solid tempo effort, and I ended up nailing a personal best, so I was stoked with that. Moving on to the strength sessions, now these are very consistent week to week. Week 1, an hour and 20 minutes of strength, and week 2, an hour and 28 minutes worth of strength work. So that was 2 sessions a week, and they basically went 1 light session at the beginning of the week, 1 heavier session later on at the end of the week. So seeing as there was no swimming, that basically wraps us up in terms of the components of training for the week. So total volume in week 1, 19 hours and 47 minutes spent training. And then week 2, 20 hours and 22 minutes spent training. So basically bang on that 20-hour week as an average across those 2. And then the training stress of those. So for those that don't know, volume of training is only one particular aspect. To actually get a training stress or a load on your body, that's volume times intensity, essentially. And so there's 2 ways you can go about it, and it's either a lot of volume at a low intensity or a lot less volume at a really high intensity can give you the same stress on your body, but obviously they will target different aspects of your fitness. So for me, week 1, I had a total training stress score of 1,034. So that'll mean nothing to people that don't know what training stress score means. That's essentially just a build-up of time training at particular intensities. And the intensity factor was 0.68. So basically saying if you had an intensity score of 1, it means that between your bike your run or your swim, normally your intensity factor is gauged off what you can do over the course of an hour, like a threshold, a real high-end threshold as a max effort. So in layman's terms, it's sort of saying I spend a fair chunk of my time, or the majority of my time across the week, at about 68% of what I was capable of putting out as a 1 hour best effort. Week 2, the training stress score was very similar again at 1,028, and then the intensity factor was exactly the same. So there's a little bit of an insight into those 2 weeks in terms of the amount of stress and accumulated fatigue that I built up in those 2 weeks, and just the total time spent training and some of the things that I actually hit. So moving on to this particular week, being the recovery week, what does that actually look like? Essentially it's all easy biking, running, and I actually was able to get into the pool this week, seeing as we dropped down into level 2 in New Zealand here, and that meant that pools were opened up, so it was great to get back to swimming. I did have planned to do 2 fitness test sessions, so that was a bike session and a run session, and the bike session being a functional threshold power, an FTP session, and then the run session being a 5k time trial. What else happened over the course of the week? I actually ended up getting a brand new pair of race shoes as well, which was super exciting. So there's a little bit of an unboxing up here. They are the Nike Next Percent 2. So I'm normally a massive Asics fan, and did try and track down the Asics Metaspeed Skies for a birthday present, seeing as it was my birthday last weekend. And unfortunately they are no longer being sold. They're a limited edition with the Tokyo Olympics, and they're all gone basically. So I thought I'd try these Nike, so looking forward to putting them to the test over the course of the coming summer. What I did want to run you through is the 2 test sessions essentially. Now, for those of you that follow along on Instagram or Facebook, you'll know that my 5k test session, one, I didn't have a camera man available for that, so I had no footage of it, and 2, I failed miserably. I did this the day after my bike test session, and I got halfway through the actual 5k time trial and pulled out. I had nothing, absolutely nothing, both physically and then obviously mentally to stop that one too. So that was a complete fail. But in terms of the bike test, the FTP test, that went really well. So I'll give you a bit of a run through of what that looked like. Essentially, I did a 20-minute warm-up. I like to warm up before you actually diving into these particular tests, as you should. The test itself has its own little built-in warm-up, but I've found I actually perform better with a slightly longer warm-up. So I warmed up for 20 minutes, just easy, gradual building, a few sort of hard, short 15-second efforts. And so once that was done, I actually jumped into the test itself. So the test itself was a total of about 37 minutes long, and it starts with a real gradual build. So I started with a 5-minute sort of free spin, that's their warm-up, and it starts off at 100 watts and progresses up in 20 watt increments every 1 minute. And this is a test until failure or until complete exhaustion. And so every minute the power increases on the test by 20 watts until you can't turn the pedals anymore. So it starts off very easy and stays very easy for quite a period of time. Then it gets into that sort of moderately hard space, and then all of a sudden you get smashed with it being incredibly hard, and you have to dig fairly deep, but it's only for a short period of time. So starting off sort of 100 watts through to about 240 to 260 watts was super easy and was good, sort of comfortable riding, warming up and building into it. Once I hit the 260 watt mark, that was where it started to be sort of comfortably hard, and there was a little bit of strain coming on, and I felt pretty good and steady from about 260 watts through to around the 320 watt mark. Once I passed through that 320 watt mark, it started getting quite hard, and then once I got up over 400 watts, as you can see on my face and from the breathing, I was starting to work fairly hard, and this was getting quite challenging. and I felt like my legs were about to fall off, and I was hanging on for dear life through 420 and 440 watts for a minute each. And then once I got through to the 460 watt mark, I just had absolutely nothing, and you can see I just grind to a complete halt. It took me a couple of minutes to collect myself, and to, probably more than a couple of minutes to collect myself and calm down, get the breathing under control and get back into it. But some really good numbers come out of that, which I was super stoked with. So overall, in terms of the actual test, my FTP number came out at 334 watts. Now that was an improvement of 15 watts from my last FTP test, which was 7 weeks ago, and that was 319 watts. If I think back to the Ironman in late March, my FTP then was 302. So I've come a reasonable way in the past 6 months. And that is without a huge amount of focus on race specific stuff as well. It's been predominantly base building stuff. So really happy with where that's at. Over the course of that test, or as a result of the test, I actually set 2 new personal bests for my 5-minute power and my 10-minute power as well. So my 5-minute power ended up being 402 watts this particular time, and that was an improvement on my previous best 5-minute power of 19 watts, and that was back in July, when so 7 weeks ago, when I last did the FTP test. For my best 10-minute power, I had a number of 352 watts, and that was an improvement over my previous best 10-minute power of 18 watts, and that previous 10-minute best power was done the week before Ironman New Zealand, so back in March. So with that test, that was an awesome test. Felt super proud and awesome after that, as much as at the time I really didn't feel very good at the end of it. But great to have that sort of progress and that sort of momentum continuing on my bike. Yeah, there's essentially a bit of data for your team in terms of me reflecting back on the past 3 weeks of this particular mini block. Moving forward now, we jump into the proper build period. So instead of having as much sort of really low intensity, easy stuff, we'll start to transition around starting to prepare for race pace efforts. So you'll start to get a bit more meat and potatoes around what I'm actually doing and how I'm preparing for a race. So if you've liked this particular video or the previous vlogs, do the YouTube thing and hit the like button down below. Subscribe to keep getting these particular updates, and I'm really enjoying putting them together. So I'll continue to pull these together over the course of the coming 3 months leading into Taupo 70.3, and we'll just see how the progress progresses, and then see what happens come race day. I'm already super excited for it, so I'm sure after the next 10 weeks worth of training in terms of good quality sessions and then a few rest weeks in between, I'll hopefully be firing on all cylinders. So looking forward to it already, and yeah, hope everyone's doing well out there. Has had a fantastic week, a great weekend, and we'll catch up with you same time again next week.